Hey there everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, helping you decide if that book's worth reading over second breakfast. Or deserves the fiery pits of Mount Doom. So let's decide. Today's book is something of a classic, I guess, if you're in the right circles. For those of you who play D&D, you've probably heard of a certain dark elf ranger character known as Drizzt. Drizzt Do'Urden. Do'Urden? I think that's how you pronounce it. So today, we will be diving deep beneath the earth, into the Underdark, to determine if Drizzt, the Legend of Drizzt, Homeland, is worth reading. Homeland was published in December 1990, though I couldn't find an exact date in which it was released. Based on what I could find, the book is actually a prequel to the Icewind Dale saga where Drizzt made his first appearance, and that while chronologically this is the first Drizzt book, it's actually not the first Drizzt book in publication date. The book itself seems relatively well received from what I could find. While I have most of the prequel trilogy, I have not actually read the Icewind Dale saga just yet, as it's known anyways. So I'm only going to provide insight that I have gained specifically from this book. I don't know anything from the following books, if Drizzt is much worse, better. I am speaking specifically as someone who's only read this book and its sequels in the first Legend of Drizzt, not necessarily someone who's read Icewind Dale. And you can argue that leaves me a bit out of the loop, and I do kind of agree. But both Wizards and everything I could find list this as the first book to read in the series. Not, this is a prequel on top of these. So as far as I'm concerned, Wizard wants me to look at it that way. Now, with this review, we'll start what we always do. The cover. Now, I have one of the newer covers for the Drizzt sagas that have been recently coming out. As you can tell, I even have the 5E logo on the side, though I do have a couple back there that have the 4E logo, and I think I've even found one with 3.5E D&D logo. Now, while I do have one of the newer covers, I have also seen a couple of the older covers. However, to focus on this one, I actually think it's pretty good. You have Drizzt front and center right here with his panther pet. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name because I'm not going to be able to pronounce it, so I'll just put it down there. As he holds a blade and seems to be looking at you, the reader, warily. Now, just glancing at this, you sort of get who he is just by looking at him. And the landscape around you tells you a bit about Minzo Berenzan. Again, I think that's how you pronounce it. As a city, it gives you a good look at the aesthetic. Drizzt and the Panther are both well designed, so you get a good idea of their personalities, both with their poses, what they're wearing. I even thought these were rags at first until I looked closer and realized, oh no, he's wearing armor. And that's a good subversion because it works well with how Drizzt as a male is on the very low rung of society, but in reality, when you get closer, you realize he's much better than society would give him credit for. Now, when we get to the back, it's a sort of synopsis. It's not a synopsis in the traditional sense. Instead, it's more of a small letter of address directly at you, the reader, from Drizzt, the main character. And while this is a give or take, I liked it in the sense that it does provide personality to both the cover and Drizzt before you even open it. It doesn't tell you much about the book itself, though, and that can be a downside. In addition to that, you just have a small little font up here talking about that gives you an actual synopsis, but extremely vague. It talks about how this is a New York Times bestseller, and how you get to join the Dark Elf in the even darker world below ground as he begins the search for his destiny. All in all, the cover's actually pretty decent. Although, I do have to comment on some of the older covers. I just, it's weird to me because I'm so used to Drow with the long, silky white hair. When I see older covers and see Drizzt has sort of that 80s mom hairdo going on, I wanted to share that a little bit because I think it's hilarious. Onto the story itself. Now, a small, quick synopsis of the story is that this is about a young Drizzt Erden, following him from when he's born, about to be a sacrifice for his house, as they are subsuming another house and raising in the ranks of Minzo Berenzan through Drow politics. He is spared at the last second when one of his older brothers betrays his other older brother, and thus they need to keep Drizzt around for, I guess, population's sake. It's hard to explain without going too deep into the Drow politics that are released here, so I'll just leave it at that. Now, throughout the book, we see him learning and struggling to adapt to Drow society, where men, due to Drow being a matriarchal society, are very low on the rung of ladder, just kind of barely above slaves, who are even lower, and how he just struggles with the cruelty that his society has become to nurture due to the influence of their god.
Lolth, is it you? My queen. My queen of biting, my queen of binding, my queen of wrapping and holding.
And then throughout the story, you sort of see how Drizzt develops into the person he will become later on through life, eventually culminating in Drizzt deciding to separate himself from his family and flee into the Underdark to make his own way of life. Now that's where this book ends. I have read the next one, and I know where that goes, but I'm not going to go into that. Now, to start with, I actually want to briefly address some of the controversy these books have had recently. For those of you who have been fans of D&D and have been hearing the changes they've been making towards certain aspects of character creation or just in general to the lore of their world, you know that you probably know what I'm going to talk about. Now, personally, I didn't like player-friendly races or a lot of the Drow culture changes with the two cities that definitely always existed, but were just isolationist and they're nice and friendly. And also the ignoring of the one good god of the Drow, the Dark Celandrin. Just, again, I'm not going to go into that. I do actually like the new D&D one that was released. I actually do like how that's built. Small complaints here and there, but overall, I think it's a great balance between player-friendly and the old style. But I'm not here to go too deep into D&D and how they're changing the character creation. What I'm really going to talk about is how R.A. Salvatore was recently, I think about a year ago, released a public apology for being racist in his writing. I personally did not see that when I read this. To me, it was sort of clear that, to me, I didn't see the Drow as an allegorical race for any race that exists in our world. And even then, I thought the book made it very clear that Drow aren't born evil. That's their society and their goddess who warps them towards evil.
Through underdark night, and guardian spiders that tickle you feel. With gossamer thread, weave our goddess's seal. The Spider Queen's children, and so too your kin, are here to remind you that you shall not sin.
You see, Drow are ruled over by a spider goddess named Loth. I say it Loth because I like the way that sounds a little better, but I think it might be Lolth. Anyways, Drow, but we see several examples of Drow who aren't Drizzt that may actually have developed into being good people if they hadn't been pressured by the higher-ranking, more evil sets of their society. Drizzt's older sister, for example, the one in charge of raising him, is harsh, but she's not cruel until their older sister comes in and says, you should be crueler, and kind of subtly threatens her because she's being too lenient. You have Zakanafin, who's Drizzt's teacher and father, we see is not at all like normal Drow, but he acts that way because the society has beaten him down into acting evil. Because if he doesn't act that way, he's as good as dead. So, in a sense, I always saw it as It's not that Drow are evil, it's that they are made evil through their society. So I'm going to put it that way. That's about as much as I'm going to address it. I'm going to focus mostly on the story from now on. But anyways, what I do like about the book, and I guess that previous thing I talked about, is that R.A. Salvatore gives a good insight on Drow. Though, from what I understand, that this history may now be outdated due to the fact that this was written, I think, in 3.5e, and we're now in 5e, so the lore of the Drow has changed quite a bit. But it does give you still a good example of how Drow culture really is. In addition, it really does set the stage rather well for Drizzt and how he became the way he did for future books. The book is written in such a way that you also don't need to be a huge D&D fan to understand most of it and where it's going. But I do admit the book is better if you do indulge in that caveat. You could probably pick this book up without knowing anything but the bare basics and pretty much enjoy it. At least if you like fantasy, that is. Despite my own personal enjoyment, I do think there was some issues that existed that I should talk about. The first is that although Drizzt isn't full-on Mary Sue in this book, as I feared he might be when I picked it up, you definitely can see quite a bit of the warning signs. It's something as small as the fact that when he's born, he has the unique soft lavender eyes that no other Drow has. And it's even addressed multiple times that it's weird that he has those eyes. And for those of you who don't know, one of the signs of a Mary Sue is that they often have a unique trait that isn't present in the rest of their species. Typically an eye color or hair color or even sometimes skin color. Then again, that might all just mean you're an anime protagonist, so... But a bigger one is... Drizzt is almost a supernaturally gifted fighter from the moment he picks up his blades. And he's putting things down single-handedly that if you were playing the game, you know it takes relatively decent level parties to be able to handle as a group. I can forgive the one where he fights and kill a Dritter or a Drider. Again, I don't know how it's supposed to be said. I've heard both ways. I prefer saying Dritter, so that's what I'm going to say. Where he fights and kills a Dritter, which is, even in 3.5, a CR6. Which is a fairly high-level monster. Not high, fairly mid-level monster. And there's another scene where he fights and defeats a stone golem all by himself. Or an earth elemental. It's one of those two. I don't think it clarifies in the book because it can't just say, this is an earth elemental CR10. Or earth elemental CR5. That's not the point. So he also puts that down single-handedly. And it gets to the point where he's just so skilled with his blades that it's hard to buy at times. So, like I said, he's not quite a Mary Sue, but he's definitely leaning towards that. Another particular issue I had is that, apart from Drizzt, none of the other characters are really that interesting. The one who comes the closest is Zakanafine, who I've said is Drizzt's biological father and the sword master of the house who teaches him how to fight. And he is a fairly complex character, and he would be decent, I feel, if more time had been spent on him. He is basically a drow male who, in any other society, would be held up in the highest regard. And even despite being a male in this one, he has some very high regard. But he's been so beaten down by his matriarchal society that covets cruelty and sadism that he acts the way he's supposed to, but just feels terrible about it, and even gets to the point where he just does not want to see his son become him, to the point that he's willing to kill his son if his son has been beaten down by the society they have. But apart from him, I don't really think I could say any other characters interesting, because all the other characters are basically villains who aren't necessarily attacking Drizzt yet, but you're not supposed to like. even the ones that have the showings that they could have been good at one time. So in reality, there's really no one else but Drizzt to latch onto and feel a connection to, because there's a good portion of it based on Drizzt is a good person. Apart from that, I guess I really don't have much else to say about the book. So with that in mind, I personally would give this book a 7 out of 10. Unfortunately, I also recognize that I am a bit biased, as I am a huge D&D fan. Those of you who've seen my bookshelf walkthrough, and those of you, just actually my bookshelf walkthrough shows it all, so link. But those of you who've seen my bookshelf walkthrough, you know that I have a good collection of D&D books, both in terms of modules and supplements, and in actual novels like this one. I do like Drow as a character race as well in general, and some of my favorite characters have been Drow. And this gave me a significant amount of insight in how their culture works and how I can play my Drow in the future. So my rating might be higher than a lot of other people's ratings. That being said, I do acknowledge that if you are not into D&D, you might not have as favorable of an opinion of this book as I did. So I just want to put that out there. However, I do recommend this if you are heavily into D&D, or if you personally just enjoy fantasy. I think it's worth a try. With that, the month comes to the end, and so time continues on. Now, those who have been watching for some time know that while I do normally put a teaser at the end of my videos to what the next book review is going to be, I instead leave the last review of the month empty and will put a wrap-up / TBR video up before the month ends. Typically on the day the month ends, though a few days early if that's a little too close to the next Monday. With that being said, it was nice having you. And remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even if it's a bad one.